By about 7000 BC, there's evidence of some agriculture and some settled communities along rivers and the coast. So I want to kind of tease out some of these earliest people. The first of these are a group known as the Yangshao, and if you look over to the right here, I've got kind of a description of where these folks are relative to this map. Yangshao are around from about 5000 to 3000 BC in the upper Yellow River. They grow millet on a small scale. It seems that they tended to live in an area for a while, and then once they had exhausted the fertility of the soil, they moved on to new areas where it hadn't been exhausted. From excavations, we know that they keep both pigs and dogs, probably both of them for meat. Pigs are going to become important in China in a whole variety of reasons, and they seem to be the first domesticated animal there, unlike what we see in kind of more desert areas like Mesopotamia and India, where things like sheep and goats become more prominent. These folks, and actually all three that we're going to talk about on this slide and then have examples of what they make on the next one, are really well known for the artifacts they produce, and more often than not, it's pottery. These folks make coil pottery. It often has really cool inscriptions and decorations on them, human faces, animals, lots of geometric designs. We know that they hunted and fished using stone tools, so they're part of a Neolithic, a new stone culture. Their houses are really cool. They tended to dig pits, and then this is something that's very common in China. They would take the earth that's mounded up around the pit that they dig, and they just bang it down really hard. It's called ramming earth. So they would make rammed earth walls, and then they would weave reeds above those, and kind of once they're woven, they would take clay and they'd smear it on top, and they'd make a plaster top to it. So big circular houses that all seem to be more or less about the same. Villages were normally a couple of dozen acres big, evidence of lots of them. They disappear around 3000. Another example of an early civilization is the Lanzhou, second that I have mentioned here, kind of in that green circle. These are folks who live along the lower Yellow River. They are folks who live, I'm blanking here, excuse me a second. Sorry. There are folks who produce artifacts that are actually superior to the other two. They have lots of jade. There's evidence of silk production, which if you didn't know, this comes from caterpillars, silkworms. Ivory. All of these are found in really elaborate burial sites. Pottery is found among the poor. These nicer things are found among the rich. And so we know that there is a stratified society with different social classes. Jade specifically is a precious stone. It's a symbol of wealth, often made into the shape of axe blades to display wealth and power. And that's particularly abundant. In the last decade, actually, remains of a major city were found that was over 700 acres. It's a square mile, if you want to translate it that way. Had 6 gates, massive palaces, evidence of artificial flood management, which is pretty cool, a massive granary to feed a population, planned streets and residences, and so far, over 300 separate communities have been discovered among this civilization that seem to be dominant about 3400 to 2250 BC. So again, way back, lots of evidence of civilization. Lastly, the Longshan, who are in the lower middle portion of the Yellow River, were prominent more recently, sometime around 3000 to 1900 BC. That means that for our purposes, they're around about the same time as the Harappans, just before Hammurabi issues his code of laws. And the hallmark of their civilization is a highly polished black pottery made on wheels, right? So if you've taken ceramics classes here or elsewhere, the development of the wheel, yeah, it's important for transportation, but it can also be used to create pottery that is very symmetrical and created in a much more efficient way than weaving coils around. They too had rammed earth walls around their cities. They mainly raised millet, but in the southern reaches also some rice and some wheat. We know they raised pigs and dogs for meat, but also incorporated sheep and goat. also started small-scale production of silk. Next slide, I've got some examples of their pottery, but they're all gone by about 2000 or so. And what we want to do is pick up after that with the Shang dynasty, which is the first dynasty in earnest, a clear connection with rulers and ideas being passed on from one generation to the next.